I pulled into the Darlington parking lot at exactly 2 p.m., which felt like some kind of miracle considering my car had been making that grinding noise for the past month. The nuclear plant looked exactly like every other industrial facility I'd ever seen: concrete, steel, and that particular shade of beige that screams government contract. Not exactly inspiring, but at this point I would have taken a job cleaning porta potties if it paid enough to cover rent. The receptionist directed me to Lucas Graham's office on the second floor. I'd Googled him the night before, found a LinkedIn profile that made him look like every middle manager who'd ever existed, the kind of guy who used phrases like synergistic solutions in actual conversations. But when I knocked on his door, the man who answered looked genuinely relieved to see me, like I was some kind of answer to his prayers instead of just another desperate job applicant. "Danielle Davidson?" He shook my hand with both of his, which was either really friendly or really weird. "Thank you so much for coming in on such short notice." His office was standard corporate bland, motivational posters about teamwork, a desk covered in papers he was probably pretending to understand, family photos positioned so visitors could see what a normal guy he was. Lucas himself looked soft around the edges, the kind of person who'd gotten comfortable behind a desk and forgotten what actual work felt like. "I have to be honest," he said, settling back into his chair. "We've had some challenges filling this position." "What kind of challenges?" I asked, because in my experience, when employers started with honesty, they were usually about to lie about something important. "High turnover," he admitted, twisting his wedding ring. "The overnight security work isn't for everyone. It can be isolating." I almost laughed. Isolating sounded perfect right now. I'd spent the last 6 months dealing with rejection emails and unemployment office bureaucrats. A little isolation might actually be therapeutic. "The pay rate reflects the difficulty," Lucas continued, sliding a paper across his desk. "Double the standard security wage, plus benefits after 30 days. I looked at the number and tried not to let my face show how desperately I needed it. This job would cover my rent, my car payment, and maybe even let me eat something besides ramen for the first time in weeks. "When would I start?" I asked. "Tomorrow night, if you're interested. Let me show you around first." The tour was quick and felt deliberately superficial. Lucas walked me through the main corridors, pointing out break rooms and bathrooms like this was a college campus instead of a nuclear facility. But I noticed things he didn't mention: doors marked with warning signs I couldn't quite read from a distance, hallways that branched off into areas he steered me away from, and a general sense that we were only seeing the parts he wanted me to see. "Security personnel have access to the main floors and common areas," he explained as we passed another restricted door. "The technical areas are off limits for safety reasons. What about emergency situations?" "We have specialized teams for that. Your job is monitoring and reporting, nothing more." We ended up in a small security office lined with monitors showing various angles of the facility. The setup looked standard enough: cameras, radio equipment, a desk covered with logbooks and clipboards. Lucas was explaining the basic monitoring procedures when someone knocked on the doorframe. "This is Jeff Nelson," Lucas said. "He's been covering nights until we found a replacement." Jeff looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes kept moving around the room, never quite settling on my face, and his hands had a slight tremor that he was trying to hide. When Lucas introduced me, Jeff just nodded and said, "You'll want to go over the protocols carefully." "Jeff's been very thorough about maintaining our security standards," Lucas said, but something in his tone suggested this wasn't entirely a compliment. "There are rules," Jeff said suddenly, pulling a folded paper from his shirt pocket. "6 of them. You need to memorize them exactly." He handed me the paper like it was some kind of sacred text. The typing was old-fashioned, probably from an actual typewriter, and the rules themselves were bizarre. 1. Never open the main entrance between 11:45 p.m. and 6 a.m., regardless of who requests entry. 2. When the radio transmits at 12:17 a.m., Respond only with, "Yes, I can hear you," and nothing else. 3. Do not investigate sounds from the break room between 1 and 2 a.m. 4. If you see anyone in the control room on camera 7, maintain eye contact with the monitor until they leave. 5. Ignore all phone calls after 3 a.m. 6. Complete your shift log every hour, but do not write anything in the 3 a.m. entry. I read through them twice, waiting for someone to explain the joke. These seem pretty specific. They're important, Jeff said, his voice tight with something that might have been fear. Follow them exactly, or you won't last the week. Lucas cleared his throat. Jeff takes security very seriously. These protocols have been developed through experience. What kind of experience? I asked. Jeff and Lucas exchanged a look that lasted about 3 seconds too long. Previous employees found the overnight environment challenging, Lucas said finally. These guidelines help maintain proper procedures. What happened to the previous employees? They couldn't handle the requirements, Jeff said, then immediately looked like he regretted speaking. Lucas stood up quickly. We should finish the paperwork. Jeff, thank you for your time. It was clearly a dismissal, but Jeff lingered in the doorway. Memorize them, he said to me. All 6. Don't try to improvise. After he left, Lucas rushed through the remaining forms, tax documents, emergency contacts, the usual bureaucratic nonsense. But he kept checking his watch and glancing toward the door like he was expecting someone, or maybe hoping no one would show up. Any other questions? He asked, already stacking the papers. Why is the turnover so high? Night work isn't for everyone, he said, which wasn't really an answer. Some people find the environment unsettling. Unsettling how? Nuclear facilities can feel intimidating. All the safety protocols, the isolation, the responsibility. It takes a certain type of person. I nodded like this made sense, but something felt off about the whole situation. The pay was too good, the rules were too weird, and both Lucas and Jeff were acting like they were hiding something important. But I needed this job more than I needed answers to questions that might get me uninvited from the opportunity. I'll see you tomorrow at 11, Lucas said, walking me toward the exit. As we passed through the main corridor, I caught a glimpse of someone watching from a control room window. The man was tall, wearing a white lab coat, and something about his posture suggested he was studying me rather than just looking. When I glanced back, he was gone. Who was that? I asked. Lucas followed my gaze to the empty window. Who was what? The man in the lab coat. I didn't see anyone, probably just a reflection. But I knew what I'd seen, and it definitely wasn't a reflection. The man had been real, and he'd been watching me specifically. Lucas's quick denial just confirmed that there were things about this place I wasn't supposed to notice. Walking back to my car, I pulled out the list of rules and read through them again. They made even less sense the second time, but Jeff's urgency had been real. Whatever was happening during those overnight shifts, it was serious enough to require very specific protocols. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. Tomorrow night, I'd find out exactly what I'd gotten myself into. But right now, I had a job that paid double the going rate, and that was enough to quiet most of my concerns. The grinding noise started up again as I drove away, but for the first time in months, I wasn't worried about it. By next week, I'd have enough money to get it fixed. Jeff's final warning echoed in my head as I merged onto the highway. Follow them exactly, or you won't last the week. I planned to follow them exactly. I just wished I understood what I was following them for. I checked my watch for the third time in 5 minutes, 10:47 p.m. The Darlington parking lot looked completely different at night, all harsh shadows and yellow security lights that made everything feel like a movie set. My car made that grinding noise again as I turned off the engine, but tonight it sounded almost reassuring. Familiar. The main entrance was locked, but Jeff had given me a key card during yesterday's tour. The hallways felt bigger in the dark, my footsteps echoing off concrete walls in a way that made me hyper-aware of every sound. I found myself walking faster than necessary, like something might be following behind me. Jeff was waiting in the security office, slumped in the desk chair like he'd been there for hours. He looked up when I knocked, and I swear his whole body sagged with relief. "You came back," he said, which seemed like a weird thing to say. "Did you think I wouldn't?" He stood up and started gathering papers from the desk. Most people don't. Not after they think about it overnight. I settled into the chair he'd vacated, still warm from his body heat. The monitors showed empty corridors and dark rooms, exactly what you'd expect from a nuclear plant at 11 p.m. What's there to think about? It's just security work. Jeff paused in his paper shuffling and looked at me directly for the first time since I'd arrived. "You memorized the rules?" I pulled the folded paper from my pocket. "All 6, though I still don't understand what they're for." "They're for keeping you safe." He said it like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "The radio voice will ask, 'Can you hear me?' at exactly 12:17. You say, 'Yes, I can hear you,' and nothing else. Don't try to have a conversation." "What happens if I do?" "I don't know. I've never tried." Jeff grabbed his jacket from a hook on the wall. "Dale Stewart runs the day shift. He's been here 15 years, knows everything about this place, but he's never worked overnight, and he doesn't talk about what happens after dark." "Why not?" "Some people prefer not to know things that don't affect them directly." Jeff was moving toward the door now, clearly eager to leave. I had about a dozen more questions, but something in his posture told me he was done answering them. "The previous guards," I said quickly. "You mentioned they quit within a week." He stopped with his hand on the doorframe. 3 of them, all good people, experienced security personnel. They just couldn't handle it." "Handle what?" "Following the rules." Jeff looked back at me one more time. "Lock yourself in at 11:45. Don't open the door for anyone, no matter what they say. And remember, you're not here to investigate anything. You're here to observe and report." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with 6 monitors, a radio, and a list of rules that made no sense. I spent the next 30 minutes familiarizing myself with the camera angles and testing the radio equipment. Everything seemed standard enough. The facility was quiet, just the background hum of machinery and air circulation systems. At 11:45, I locked the security office door from the inside, just like Jeff had instructed. The lock made a solid clicking sound that felt more final than it should have. I was reviewing the employee directory when the knocking started. Soft at first, barely audible over the facility's ambient noise, but definitely knocking, coming from the direction of the main entrance. My first instinct was to check the monitors, but camera 1 showed an empty entrance area. No one standing outside, no vehicles in the immediate vicinity. But the knocking continued, a steady rhythm that suggested someone who expected to be let in. Then came the voice. "Hello? Is anyone there? I need to get inside." I looked at the clock, 11:58 p.m. The first rule was clear. Never open the main entrance between 11:45 p.m. and 6:01 a.m., regardless of who requests entry. But the voice sounded reasonable, professional, not threatening. "My name is Clyde Cochran. I work here. I forgot my access card and I need to retrieve some important documents from my office." I grabbed the employee directory and flipped through it quickly. There he was, Clyde Cochran, Research Division. The listing showed he had legitimate access to the facility. The knocking grew more insistent. "I can see the security office light is on. I know someone's in there. This is really important. I have a presentation tomorrow morning and I need those files." I stared at the monitors, but they still showed empty corridors. Either the cameras had blind spots or something was wrong with the system. The voice was coming from the right direction, though, definitely from the main entrance. "Look, I understand you have protocols, but I'm a senior researcher here. You can call Lucas Graham if you need authorization. I just need 5 minutes to grab my documents." The voice was getting agitated now, taking on an edge that made my stomach tighten. But the rule was clear. No exceptions, regardless of who requests entry. This is ridiculous. I've been working here for 3 years. Check your employee list. Clyde Cochran, Research Division. I have every right to be in this building. I found myself standing up, moving toward the door. The voice was so reasonable, so frustrated in a way that felt completely authentic. What if this was a real emergency? What if I was being an obstacle to legitimate work? But Jeff's warning echoed in my head. Follow them exactly, or you won't last the week. I know you can hear me in there, the voice continued, and now it definitely sounded angry. Open this door right now, or I'm calling your supervisor. You're going to lose your job over this stupidity. I checked the clock again. 12:03 a.m. The knocking had been going on for 5 minutes now, and the voice was getting more hostile with each passing moment. You have no idea what you're interfering with. These documents are critical to national security research. By refusing me entry, you're potentially compromising classified work. National security. That sounded important enough to override security protocols, but the rule didn't mention exceptions for national security, or for senior researchers, or for any other circumstances. Fine. I'll remember this. I'll remember exactly who was working tonight when I file my report tomorrow. You just made a very serious mistake. The knocking stopped, abruptly. Not gradually, not with a final, frustrated bang. Just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. I waited, listening for footsteps or a car door slamming or any sound that would indicate the person was leaving. But there was nothing, just the facility's mechanical humming and the sound of my own breathing. I checked all the monitors again. Empty parking lot, empty corridors, empty entrance area. No sign that anyone had been there at all. The clock read 12:07 a.m. In 10 minutes, the radio would crackle to life with its mysterious transmission. I settled back into the desk chair and tried to shake off the feeling that I'd just failed some kind of test. But I'd followed the rules exactly, just like Jeff had insisted. And despite the voice's threats and reasonable explanations, I was still here, still employed, still safe behind a locked door. The silence felt different now, though. Not peaceful, but expectant, like the building itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. I was staring at the clock when it hit 12:17 exactly. The radio crackled to life like someone had just flipped a switch, static filling the small office before cutting to perfect clarity. "Can you hear me?" The voice was calm, measured, almost clinical, not what I'd expected after the angry knocking earlier. I grabbed the radio handset, my mouth suddenly dry. "Yes, I can hear you." Silence. Then the static returned for maybe 3 seconds before cutting out completely. That was it. No follow-up questions, no instructions, nothing. Just like Jeff had said, ask and answer, nothing more. I set the radio down and tried to shake off the weird feeling that I'd just participated in something important without understanding what it was. The voice hadn't sounded like facility personnel, too detached, too formal, like someone reading from a script. The next hour passed quietly. I filled out the shift log, checked each camera feed twice, and tried not to think about how the building felt different now. Bigger somehow, with too many dark corners that the cameras couldn't quite reach. During my tour yesterday, Lucas had shown me areas that seemed well lit and normal, but on the monitors, whole sections of the facility disappeared into shadows that didn't make sense. At 1:05, laughter drifted down the hallway. Not the kind of laughter you'd expect from a break room. This was sharp, almost manic. Multiple voices overlapping in a way that made my skin crawl. Then came the sound of furniture scraping across the floor, heavy objects being dragged or repositioned. I looked at camera 3, which showed the break room door, closed just like it had been all night. But the sounds were definitely coming from that direction, getting louder and more chaotic. Chairs being stacked maybe, or tables being flipped. Rule number 3 echoed in my head. Do not investigate sounds from the break room between 1 and 2 a.m. I forced myself to look away from the monitor and focus on my paperwork. The employee directory, shift schedules, Anything to keep my hands busy while the sounds continued. Someone was having a party in there, or a fight, or something that involved a lot of movement and occasional bursts of that unsettling laughter. At 1:28, everything stopped. Not gradually, just cut off mid-sound like someone had hit a mute button. I waited another 5 minutes before checking camera 3 again. The break room door remained closed and the hallway was empty. I wrote 1 a.m. all quiet in the shift log and tried to convince myself that was true. Around 2:15, I noticed him. Camera 7 showed the main control room, a space filled with computer terminals and monitoring equipment that I'd glimpsed during yesterday's tour. Standing in the far corner, barely visible in the shadows between two equipment racks, was a man. He wasn't moving, wasn't checking instruments or reading displays, just standing there, facing the camera. His face was too dark to make out clearly, but something about his posture suggested he was staring directly at me through the lens. Rule number 4. If you see anyone in the control room on camera 7, maintain eye contact with the monitor until they leave. I pulled my chair closer to the screen and focused on the figure. He was tall, wearing what looked like a white coat, though the shadows made it hard to be certain. His hands hung at his sides, completely still. No fidgeting, no shifting weight from foot to foot, just perfect, unnatural stillness. Minutes crawled by. My eyes started to water from staring at the screen without blinking, but I didn't dare look away. The figure never moved, never turned his head or adjusted his position. It was like watching a statue, except statues don't breathe, and I could swear I saw the faint rise and fall of his chest. At 2:31, my neck started cramping. At 2:45, my vision began to blur from the strain. But the man remained in his corner, patient as death, waiting for something I couldn't understand. Then, between 2:52 and 2:53, he was gone. I blinked and the corner was empty. No movement on the camera, no sign of anyone leaving through the visible doorways. He'd simply vanished, like he'd never been there at all. I rubbed my eyes and checked the timestamp. 37 minutes of staring at a motionless figure who disappeared without a trace. My neck ached, and I had the beginning of a headache, but I'd followed the rule exactly. As 3 a.m. approached, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the security office. Slow, deliberate steps that seemed to pause right outside my door. I checked every camera feed. All the corridors were empty, but the footsteps continued, pacing back and forth like someone was patrolling the area just beyond the range of the cameras. I looked at the clock, 2:58 a.m. Almost time for the blank entry in the shift log, though I still didn't understand why that particular hour needed to be omitted from the record. At exactly 3:01, the radio crackled again. First shift complete. Different voice this time, older, more gravelly. The transmission lasted maybe 3 seconds before cutting to static, then silence. The footsteps stopped immediately, like whoever had been pacing had received some kind of signal. I waited, listening for any sound that would indicate movement, but the hallway had gone quiet. I stared at the 3 a.m. line in the shift log and left it blank, just like the rules specified. Whatever had happened during that hour, I wasn't supposed to document it. The rest of the night passed without incident. I completed my hourly entries, monitored the cameras, and tried not to think about the figure in the control room, or the sounds from the break room, or the voice that had announced the completion of something I didn't understand. At 6 a.m. sharp, Jeff's keycard beeped at the security office door. I unlocked it from the inside, and he stepped in looking like he'd been awake all night despite supposedly being off duty. "You're still here," he said, and the surprise in his voice was genuine. "Where else would I be?" Most people quit before completing their first night. He looked around the office like he was checking for damage. "How did it go?" "Quiet," I said, which wasn't exactly a lie. "I followed all the rules." Jeff nodded slowly, studying my face like he was looking for signs of something. "The radio transmission at 12:17. Can you hear me?" I said yes, just like you told me. "And you didn't try to continue the conversation?" "No." "The break room sounds?" I didn't investigate. Camera 7? I hesitated. There was someone in the control room. I maintained eye contact until he left. Jeff's expression shifted, becoming more alert. How long? 37 minutes. And you didn't look away? Not once? Not once. He seemed genuinely relieved, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since he'd arrived. Good. That's really good. What happens if I look away? Jeff was already gathering his things, preparing to start his day shift. I don't know. I've never looked away. But you must have some idea. The second night is more challenging, he said, cutting me off. The patterns change. The timing shifts. But if you can handle tonight, you can probably handle anything they throw at you. They. Not it. Not the job. Not the facility. They. Who's they? I asked. But Jeff was already heading for the door, leaving me with more questions than answers, and the growing certainty that I'd just survived something that wasn't supposed to be survivable. I gathered my things and walked to my car as the sun came up, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The grinding noise started up again when I turned the key, but it sounded different now. Less urgent maybe, or maybe I was just too tired to care. Jeff's warning echoed in my head as I drove home. The second night is more challenging. I'd followed every rule exactly and made it through my first shift, but something told me that surviving one night was just the beginning of whatever test I'd unknowingly signed up for. I walked out of the facility at 6:30 a.m., feeling like I'd just passed some kind of test I didn't know I was taking. The morning air was crisp, and for the first time in months, I felt like I might actually be good at something again. Sure, the night had been weird, but I'd handled it. I'd followed the rules, survived the strange sounds and mysterious figures, and earned a full night's pay at double the normal rate. I was fishing my keys out of my bag when I heard footsteps behind me. You must be the new night guard. I turned to see a stocky man in his late 40s walking toward me, wearing a Navy Company polo and carrying a thermos that smelled like coffee. His face was broad and honest looking, the kind of guy you'd trust to fix your car or help you move furniture. Danielle Davidson, I said, extending my hand. Just finished my first shift. Dale Stewart, day shift supervisor. His handshake was firm but brief, and his eyes didn't quite meet mine. 15 years here. How'd it go? Fine, quiet night. Dale nodded, but something in his expression suggested he didn't quite believe me. Jeff give you the rundown on procedures? He was very thorough about the protocols. Good. Jeff's solid. Knows the importance of following procedures exactly. Dale shifted his weight, glancing toward the building like he was eager to get inside. Most people find the overnight work challenging. So I've heard. Lucas mentioned high turnover. Yeah, well, Dale's voice got carefully neutral. Some people aren't cut out for this place. The isolation gets to them, or they can't handle the responsibility. Nuclear facilities aren't like regular security jobs. I waited for him to elaborate, but he just stood there sipping his coffee and avoiding eye contact. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. What happened to the previous guards? I asked. Dale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They moved on to other opportunities, better fits for their skill sets. All 3 of them? Look, I work days. I don't know much about what goes on after dark, and I prefer it that way. Different shifts, different responsibilities. He was already backing toward the building. Some things are better left to the people who are trained for them. But you've been here 15 years. You must have some idea. I stick to my lane, Dale said firmly. Power generation, maintenance schedules, day-to-day operations. That's my job. What happens on other shifts isn't my concern. He was lying. Not about his job responsibilities, but about not knowing what happened at night. The way he avoided my questions, the careful phrasing, the obvious desire to end the conversation. Dale knew exactly what I'd experienced during my shift. He just didn't want to talk about it. Well, I said, I guess I'll see you around shift changes. Maybe. I usually head out right at 6. Dale was already walking away. Good luck with the job. I watched him disappear through the main entrance, moving faster than necessary. For someone who claimed ignorance about night operations, he seemed awfully nervous about my first shift going well. The drive home gave me time to think. Dale's evasiveness bothered me more than Jeff's cryptic warnings or Lucas's obvious relief at finding someone desperate enough to take the job. Jeff was scared, and Lucas was hiding something, but at least they were honest about the situation being unusual. Dale was pretending everything was normal, while clearly knowing it wasn't. Back in my apartment, I made coffee and opened my laptop. If Dale wouldn't tell me about previous guards, maybe I could find out myself. I started with basic searches about Darlington, looking for any news stories or incident reports from the past few years. Most of what came up was routine stuff, maintenance schedules, regulatory inspections, the usual bureaucratic updates you'd expect from a nuclear facility. But buried in the local news archives, I found more interesting items. 3 years ago, the Clarington Courier had run a small article about unusual electromagnetic readings detected by amateur radio operators in the area. The readings occurred primarily during overnight hours and seemed to originate from the direction of the nuclear plant. Ontario Power Generation had issued a statement attributing the readings to routine testing of backup communication systems. 2 years ago, there was a brief mention of a workplace accident at Darlington that resulted in one fatality. Marcus Webb, age 31, security contractor. The article said he'd fallen down a stairwell during his shift, but provided no other details. The investigation was handled internally, and no charges were filed. Last year, another workplace accident. Jennifer Moss, age 28, also security contractor. Equipment malfunction was the official cause of death, but again, no specifics. Internal investigation, no charges. 2 security guards dead in 2 years, both during overnight shifts. That seemed like more than coincidence, especially given the high turnover rate Lucas had mentioned. I dug deeper, searching for any connection between the deaths and the electromagnetic readings. The timeline was suggestive. The unusual readings had been reported consistently for 3 years, and the deaths had occurred during the same period. Then I found something that made my coffee go cold. A regulatory filing from 3 years ago, submitted by someone named Rosie Harper, a plant engineer. The document was heavily redacted, but the visible portions mentioned unauthorized experiments, potential safety violations, and immediate investigation required. The filing was dated 6 months before the first reported death. I searched for more information about Rosie Harper and found a brief professional profile on LinkedIn. Environmental engineer, specialized in power systems, worked at Darlington for 2 years before leaving to pursue opportunities in British Columbia. Her departure date matched exactly with the regulatory filing. I tried calling the number listed on her profile, but it was disconnected. Her email bounced back as undeliverable. For someone who'd supposedly moved to pursue better opportunities, Rosie Harper had done a remarkably thorough job of disappearing. The pattern was becoming clear. Rosie had discovered something wrong at the facility and tried to report it. Shortly after, she'd vanished and security guards started dying during overnight shifts. Whatever was happening at Darlington, it was dangerous enough to kill people and important enough to cover up. My phone rang, making me jump. Lucas Graham's name appeared on the screen. "Danielle, just wanted to check in after your first night. How are you feeling?" "Fine. It went well." "Excellent. I have to say, I'm impressed. Most new hires need a few days to adjust to our procedures, but Jeff said you handled everything perfectly." Jeff had talked to Lucas already. That seemed fast, considering I'd left the facility less than 4 hours ago. "The protocols are pretty straightforward once you understand them," I said. "That's a mature attitude. Some people get hung up on the specifics, wanting explanations for every little detail. But you seem to understand that some procedures exist for good reasons, even if those reasons aren't immediately obvious. There was something in his tone that felt like a test, like he was gauging whether I'd ask uncomfortable questions or just accept the situation as presented. "I'm here to do the job," I said, "not to second-guess procedures that have been developed through experience." "Exactly. That's exactly the right mindset." Lucas sounded genuinely pleased. "I should mention, we're conducting some specialized testing during night hours over the next few weeks. Nothing that affects your duties, but it requires minimal personnel presence in certain areas. That's part of why the overnight protocols are so specific." Specialized testing. That was the first time anyone had mentioned testing of any kind. "What kind of testing?" "Technical evaluations, equipment calibration. Very routine stuff, but it requires controlled conditions." Lucas's voice had gotten more careful. "The important thing is that night security personnel follow established protocols exactly. No improvisation, no exceptions." "Of course." "Good. Well, I'll let you get some rest. See you tonight at 11. He hung up before I could ask any more questions. I stared at my laptop screen, at the articles about electromagnetic readings and dead security guards and a missing engineer who'd tried to blow the whistle on unauthorized experiments. Lucas's call felt less like a check-in and more like a warning. Follow the protocols, don't ask questions, and maybe I wouldn't end up like Marcus Webb or Jennifer Moss. But I'd already started asking questions, and the answers I was finding made me think that following the rules might not be enough to keep me safe. I closed the laptop and tried to get some sleep, but my mind kept racing. Tonight would be my second shift, and Jeff had warned me that the patterns would change. Whatever test I'd passed last night was apparently just the beginning. As I finally drifted off around noon, I couldn't shake the image of Lucas watching me from his office window, studying me with an expression I still couldn't interpret. It hadn't looked like concern for a new employee. It had looked like a scientist observing a lab rat. I settled into the security office chair at 10:55 p.m., feeling more prepared than I had the night before. I knew what to expect now: the weird knocking, the radio transmissions, the mysterious figures. Just follow the rules, collect my paycheck, and try not to think too hard about what any of it meant. Except tonight, everything started wrong. At 11:52, 8 minutes before the rules said anything should happen, someone started pounding on the main entrance. Not the polite knocking from last night. This was urgent, desperate hammering that echoed through the empty corridors. "Security, open up. We have an emergency." I checked camera 1. Empty parking lot, empty entrance area. But the voice was different too. Not the clinical tone of Clyde Cochran, but rougher, more familiar. "This is Dale Stewart, day shift supervisor. I need immediate access to the control room. We've got a coolant pressure spike in reactor 2, and the automated systems aren't responding." My hands froze over the radio. Dale Stewart was real. I'd met him this morning. And coolant pressure spikes were exactly the kind of emergency that could kill people if not handled quickly. "I know you're in there," Dale's voice continued. "I can see the security office light. Look, I know about the overnight protocols, but this is a genuine emergency. People could die if we don't get this under control." I stared at the first rule. Never open the main entrance between 11:45 p.m. and 6 a.m., regardless of who requests entry. No exceptions mentioned, but surely a nuclear emergency would override security protocols. "Check the employee directory," Dale called out. "I'm listed as day shift supervisor, 15 years of experience. I know this plant better than anyone. The pressure readings are climbing, and I need to access the manual override controls." I found Dale Stewart in the directory, exactly where he should be. 15 years of service, supervisor credentials, authorized for all areas. His voice carried the kind of technical knowledge that couldn't be faked. Specific terminology, system details, the kind of information only someone with real experience would know. "I'm calling Lucas Graham right now. Dale said. "He's going to be furious when he finds out security protocols prevented emergency response. You think your job is safe after letting a reactor melt down because you were too scared to open a door?" The threat hit exactly where it hurt most. I needed this job. I couldn't afford to be fired for following rules that might not apply to genuine emergencies. But Jeff's voice echoed in my memory. "Never open it for anyone, regardless of what they say." "I'm sorry," I called through the door. "I can't open the entrance during overnight hours. If this is a real emergency, you should contact the emergency response team." The pounding stopped abruptly. For a moment, I thought Dale had left to handle the crisis through proper channels. Then his voice came back, cold and angry. "You just made a serious mistake. I'm documenting this refusal to cooperate with emergency procedures. When people get hurt because you wouldn't follow direct orders from a supervisor, that's on you. I hope you can live with the consequences." The silence that followed felt different from last night, not expectant but hostile. Like the building itself was angry at my decision. At 12:20, the radio crackled to life. "Do you understand?" I grabbed the handset but hesitated. The rules only covered one specific question and response. This was different, and I had no idea what I was supposed to say. "Yes, I understand," I said, hoping that was close enough. Instead of cutting to static, the transmission continued. "Basement level B3, section 7G, maintenance access required. Coordinates." The voice was giving me specific location information, directing me somewhere I'd never heard of. During yesterday's tour, Lucas had mentioned basement levels but claimed they were restricted technical areas. "Confirm receipt," the voice said. I confirm receipt. "Proceed when instructed." The radio went silent, leaving me staring at the handset. "Proceed where? To basement level B3? That definitely wasn't part of my job description." At 12:30, sounds started coming from the break room direction, but instead of the chaotic laughter and furniture scraping from last night, I heard voices. Multiple people talking in hushed, urgent tones. I couldn't make out specific words, but the rhythm sounded like a meeting, or an argument. Serious conversation happening in a room that should be empty. Rule 3 said not to investigate sounds from the break room between 1 and 2 a.m. But it was only 12:30, and these weren't the same kinds of sounds as before. I looked at camera 3, expecting to see the closed break room door. The door was standing wide open. I stared at the monitor, certain I was seeing things wrong. The break room door had been closed all night. I'd checked it multiple times, but now it gaped open like a mouth, revealing darkness beyond. The voices continued, clearer now. I could almost distinguish individual speakers, though the words remained unclear. It sounded like at least 4 people having an intense discussion about something urgent. My training kicked in. If there were unauthorized personnel in the facility, I needed to document it and report to my supervisor. That was basic security protocol, regardless of whatever weird rules Jeff had given me. I reached for the radio to call Lucas, then stopped. The voices from the break room had gone silent. Not gradually, just cut off mid-sentence like someone had hit a mute button. I looked back at camera 3. The break room door was closed again. I rewound the camera feed, checking the timestamp. According to the system, the door had never opened. The footage showed a consistently closed door for the entire night, but I'd seen it open. I'd heard the voices. At 1:15, I spotted movement on camera 7. Not one figure this time, but 3. They stood in different corners of the control room, positioned like points of a triangle. All 3 faced inward toward the center of the room, perfectly still. Rule 4 said to maintain eye contact with the monitor if anyone appeared in the control room. But how was I supposed to maintain eye contact with 3 different figures simultaneously? I focused on the figure in the far corner, the same position as last night's visitor. He wore a white coat and stood with the same unnatural stillness. But in my peripheral vision, I could see the other 2 figures, equally motionless, equally wrong. Minutes passed. My eyes watered from staring at the screen, but I didn't dare look away. The three figures remained frozen in their positions, creating a tableau that made my skin crawl. Then I made a mistake. My attention drifted to the figure on the left just for a second. I wanted to see his face, to understand what they were all staring at in the center of the room. The moment my gaze shifted, alarms started blaring throughout the facility. Loud, piercing sirens that echoed through every corridor. Emergency lights flashed on the monitors, bathing the hallways in pulsing red. The sound was deafening, even through the security office walls. I looked back at camera 7. All three figures were gone. The alarms continued for exactly 90 seconds, then cut off as abruptly as they'd started. The emergency lights stopped flashing, returning the facility to normal illumination. I sat in the sudden silence, my ears ringing, trying to process what had just happened. Looking away from the figures had triggered some kind of alarm system, but that was impossible. Cameras were for observation, not interaction. At 1:23, Lucas Graham's keycard beeped at the security office door. I unlocked it, and he stepped inside looking perfectly calm despite the facility-wide emergency that had just occurred. His hair was neat, his clothes unwrinkled, like he'd been awake and dressed rather than roused from sleep by alarms. "Everything under control?" he asked, settling into the spare chair like this was a routine visit. "The alarms just went off. Some kind of emergency. Scheduled maintenance," Lucas said smoothly. "We test the emergency systems periodically to ensure proper function. Sorry if it startled you. I should have mentioned it might happen during your shift." His explanation sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced it, and the timing was too convenient. The alarms had started the exact moment I'd looked away from the figures on camera 7. It seemed pretty intense for a test. We take safety seriously here. Better to over-test than under-prepare. Lucas glanced at the monitors, his gaze lingering on camera 7. "How has the rest of your shift been? Any unusual incidents?" The question felt loaded, like he already knew about the early knocking, the changed radio transmission, the voices in the break room. "Quiet night," I said. "Good. That's what we like to hear." Lucas stood up, straightening his jacket. "I should mention we'll be conducting some additional testing over the next few nights. Nothing that affects your duties, but you might notice some variations in the usual patterns." Variations, like the knocking starting early, or radio transmissions giving coordinates instead of simple questions. What kind of testing? Technical evaluations, equipment calibration. The same vague explanation as yesterday's phone call. The important thing is to continue following established protocols exactly, even when circumstances seem unusual. He was telling me to stick to the rules no matter what happened, even when those rules didn't cover new situations like multiple figures in the control room or voices giving me coordinates. Of course. "Excellent. Well, I'll let you finish your shift in peace." Lucas headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Danielle, if anyone claims to be Dale Stewart requesting emergency access, don't open the door. Dale doesn't work nights, and he knows better than to request entry during restricted hours." My blood went cold. Lucas knew about the knocking, about Dale's voice claiming there was a reactor emergency, which meant either Lucas had been monitoring my communications or the voice hadn't been Dale at all. "How did you—" "We take security very seriously here," Lucas said. "Sleep well." He left me alone with the monitors and the growing certainty that nothing about this job was what it seemed. The knocking, the radio transmissions, the figures in the control room, they weren't random occurrences or equipment malfunctions. They were tests, and I was the subject. I looked at the clock, 1:31 a.m. Still hours left in my shift, and Lucas had warned me about variations in the usual patterns. If tonight was more challenging than last night, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out what tomorrow would bring. But I needed this job more than I needed answers. So I settled back into my chair, kept my eyes on the monitors, and tried not to think about what kind of testing required human subjects who didn't know they were being tested. The building felt different now, not just strange, but actively hostile, like it was watching me back through the cameras, waiting to see how long I could follow rules that seemed designed to break people rather than protect them. I stared at the monitors for the rest of my shift, but nothing else happened. No more figures, no mysterious radio calls, no emergency alarms. Just me and the humming machinery and the growing certainty that I was being watched by more than just security cameras. At 6 a.m., Jeff's keycard beeped at the door, but when I unlocked it, Lucas walked in instead, followed by Jeff, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Good morning, Danielle," Lucas said, settling into the spare chair with the same casual authority he'd shown during his middle-of-the-night visit. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." My stomach dropped. "About what?" "About what you've really been experiencing during your shifts." Lucas folded his hands in his lap, studying my face. "The knocking, the radio transmissions, the figures on camera 7. You've been handling our protocols remarkably well, but I think you deserve to understand what's actually happening here." Jeff shifted uncomfortably by the door, avoiding my eyes. Whatever Lucas was about to tell me, Jeff already knew. "The rules Jeff gave you aren't arbitrary security measures," Lucas continued. "They're protective protocols designed to minimize psychological stress during our research operations. The Darlington facility has been selected for classified testing of electromagnetic technologies that can influence human perception and behavior." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What kind of testing?" "Psychological warfare applications. The ability to create targeted hallucinations, disorientation, compliance responses in enemy personnel. Very cutting-edge stuff with significant national security implications." The clinical way he said it made my skin crawl. "You're experimenting on people." "We're conducting controlled research with proper safety protocols," Lucas corrected. "The overnight security position provides an ideal testing environment, isolated subjects, controlled conditions, measurable stress responses." The figures I saw, Dr. Clyde Cochran and his research team, observing from concealed areas within the facility. The radio transmissions are part of the testing protocol, measuring response times and compliance under various stress conditions. Everything you've experienced has been carefully designed and monitored. I thought about the voice claiming to be Dale, the emergency about reactor pressure, the knocking at the door, audio projections designed to test decision-making under pressure. We needed to see if you would follow protocols even when presented with seemingly reasonable justifications to break them. My hands were shaking. "And the previous guards?" Lucas's expression grew more serious. "Unfortunately, not everyone responds well to prolonged exposure to the testing environment. Some individuals experience psychological breaks that make continued employment inadvisable. They didn't quit. They had breakdowns. The research is still being refined. Early subjects experienced more severe effects than we anticipated, but we've improved the protocols significantly. Your responses have been much more stable." Jeff finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to warn you." Jeff has been invaluable in helping us understand how to minimize psychological damage while maintaining research integrity, Lucas said. "His insights have made the program much safer for subsequent subjects." I stared at Jeff, understanding flooding through me. "You've been reporting on me, telling them how I react to everything." "I had to," Jeff said miserably. "They said if I helped them refine the protocols, fewer people would get hurt. I thought I was protecting you." "And Dale?" "Dale provides behavioral assessments and background information that helps us predict subject responses," Lucas explained. "He's been instrumental in identifying candidates who can handle the stress levels involved." The conversation I'd had with Dale this morning took on a new meaning. He hadn't been evasive because he didn't know what happened at night. He'd been evasive because he was part of it. "This is illegal," I said. Human experimentation without consent is a necessary component of national defense research, Lucas interrupted. The techniques we're developing could save thousands of lives by allowing our military to neutralize threats without conventional warfare. Sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices. You can't just experiment on people without telling them. Informed consent would compromise the research validity. Subjects who know they're being tested respond differently than those experiencing genuine stress. We need authentic psychological data. I felt sick. What happens now that you've told me? Lucas leaned forward, his expression becoming more businesslike. Now we offer you a choice. You can continue working here with full knowledge of the research program at triple your current salary, with the understanding that you're contributing to vital national security research. Or, he didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. What about Rosie Harper, the engineer who tried to report this? Lucas's face hardened slightly. Ms. Harper was relocated to a position better suited to her skill set and discretion level. She's doing very well in her new role, though she's found it necessary to limit her communications with former colleagues. You threatened her. We helped her understand the importance of maintaining appropriate confidentiality about classified research, just as we're helping you understand your options. The door opened, and a tall man in a white lab coat walked in. I recognized him immediately. The figure from camera 7, the one I'd been maintaining eye contact with for 37 minutes 2 nights ago. Dr. Clyde Cochran, Lucas said, our research director. Clyde studied me with the same clinical detachment I'd heard in the radio transmissions. Fascinating stress response patterns, much more stable than previous subjects. I'd very much like to continue the research with your cooperation. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway behind him, making it clear that cooperation wasn't really optional. The testing protocols will continue regardless, Clyde continued. But willing participation allows us to implement additional safety measures and provide appropriate compensation for your contribution to national security. I looked around the room, at Lucas with his bureaucratic smile, at Clyde with his scientific curiosity, at Jeff with his guilty misery, at the security guards with their obvious threat. How much time do I have to decide? No time at all, Clyde said. Your shift ends in 15 minutes. You'll either return tonight as a willing research participant, or you'll be replaced by someone else who doesn't yet understand the situation. The message was clear. Agree to be a test subject, or become a workplace accident like the previous guards who'd asked too many questions. Triple salary, I said slowly, plus benefits, and a substantial bonus for each completed testing cycle, Lucas added. Very generous compensation for what amounts to sitting in a chair and following simple protocols. I thought about my grinding car, my empty bank account, my months of unemployment, about Rosie Harper, forced to disappear rather than expose what was happening here, about Marcus Webb and Jennifer Moss, the security guards who died during overnight shifts. I'll do it, I said. Lucas smiled. Excellent. I knew you were the right person for this position. Clyde nodded approvingly. We'll begin the next phase of testing tonight. More complex scenarios, longer duration stress responses. Your cooperation will be invaluable. Jeff looked relieved, like my agreement somehow absolved him of his own complicity. As they filed out of the security office, leaving me alone to finish my shift log, I tried to look appropriately resigned to my fate. But inside, my mind was racing. They thought they'd bought my silence with money and threats. They thought I was just another desperate person who'd choose survival over principles. They were wrong. I had 8 hours before my next shift to figure out how to document everything I'd learned, how to contact authorities who weren't part of the cover-up, how to gather evidence that couldn't be dismissed or destroyed. Rosie Harper had tried to expose this place and been forced to run. The previous guards had tried to resist and ended up dead. But I had something they hadn't. I knew what I was walking into now. I understood the game they were playing. the rules they were using, the weaknesses in their system. I walked out of the facility at 6:30 a.m., nodding politely to Dale as he arrived for his day shift. He looked relieved to see me, probably thinking his information gathering had helped keep another test subject stable and compliant. The morning sun felt different now, not like freedom, but like borrowed time. I had one day to figure out how to survive long enough to bring down an illegal government experiment that had already killed at least 2 people. My car started on the first try, the grinding noise barely noticeable. Funny how small problems seemed insignificant when you were planning to take on a conspiracy that reached into classified research programs and national security budgets. Tonight, I'd go back to that security office, sit in that chair, and let them think I was just another willing victim of their psychological warfare testing. But I'd be gathering evidence with every breath, documenting every detail, building a case that would expose what Darlington really was. They wanted to study human behavior under stress. They were about to get a masterclass in what happened when their test subjects started fighting back.